We haven't said a great deal about this with this chap who's been appearing on the screen behind us. So I've got a few little bits written down, and I've had to type it out. I would have liked it to be more free-flowing, but unfortunately I'm probably too pissed. So anyway, this is what we got. So we've got Barry Stewart Williams. So I'm just going to start with an extract from a short but very, very touching tribute to Barry that I received on email. And it goes like this. It says, I always found Barry to be a decent chap, full of humility. Many have described him as outrageously extrovert, very much a peacock. Well, if that's true, then I'm a Dutchman. Deepest sympathy and regards, Jos van Hoekenstraat. So, yeah, right, Barry was born on the 22nd of September 1959. A date I came to, I told you I was pissed. A date I came to know very well because I had to keep quoting it when I got his repeat prescriptions. And sadly, he departed the world on the 4th of April this year. He probably crammed about 80 years of living into the 62 that were, on the official records. I didn't know much of this, so very much great thanks to Liz for this, for passing the detail on. His parents were Bill and Ivy, and he had a brother Glyn who was 10 years older than him. They lived in Walworth at first, then they moved to Canterbury Road in Malden on the St Helier estate. It was here that Barry spent his childhood, and he attended Glastonbury High School, and I just wonder if Glastonbury might have had some bearing on all the old crap you can see down there. And then at the age of 14, the family moved to Carew Road in Wallington. As a child, Barry and his family spent many years holidaying in the Isle of Wight, and you'll actually probably see a few snaps of those coming up. And it was here that he developed his love of sunbathing and the sea. And he always wanted to live by the coast. His parents seriously considered moving to the Isle of Wight in the 70s, but something stopped them, and Barry was unhappy that they weren't brave enough to move away from Wallington. Being a resident of Carshort, I could see where he's coming from. Now, sadly, Barry lost his mother when he was only 20, and then his father 8 years later. He also lost his brother in 2005. He talked to me about this, and it was quite a harrowing experience for him, I think. And I'm not going to go into that now because it's we're celebrating his life. What he was saying, I think I took as a sort of pretty confidential statement, so I'm not going to broadcast all that. So he had a bit of a harrowing time. He had various relationships throughout his life, most notably with Liz, and they had a son, Christopher, in the early 90s. Barry got his wish to live near the sea for a few years whilst in rehab, struggling with his alcohol addiction, which I think probably we all know about. And that was in Bournemouth some 20 years ago. And then around 2013 he went to live in Pevensey Bay for a short while. Now when he left school, and probably not a lot of people know this, after leaving school he served an apprenticeship as a bookbinder for a company in Mitcham. And these were subsequently swallowed up by Cambridge University Press. And he remained there till the mid-90s when the company relocated to Cambridge. He had a variety of jobs after that until ill health forced him to give up work a few years ago. He was actually very happy at his last company, which was it was a wheelie bin cleaning company, and he seemed to be very, very happy there. And then they were taken over by some people who, myself and a couple of other members of the band, treated him very, very poorly indeed. And this poor treatment, coupled up with his failing health, caused him a great deal of anxiety. So much so that after probably about 15 years, he took refuge in the bottle again. He tried to do some office work on the PC, but as many of you know, his technology skills made him as useful as a dolphin in the sentry box. He was a very talented musician, and he taught himself to play the guitar in his teenage years. He loved music and spent much of his life playing in bands and gigging far and near. He spent many years in the 80s and 90s gigging locally in the Cartoon in Croydon and other venues in South London, whilst playing with his mate Rob Tate and the various incarnations of their band. Later he played with Rumble Drumskin, the drum side, Silk Road, and with us with Dirty Spoons. Now I found his musical talent astonishing. If you asked him to play a D, he wouldn't have a clue what you were talking about. But if you ask him to play a tune he'd never heard before, he'd listen to it first time round, then second time round he'd join in, and then the third time he'd start improvising. He was an absolutely brilliant guitar player. Now, I haven't known Barry for as long as many of the people here. By the time of his passing, I felt I knew him quite well. What I liked about him was that he was a very, very funny man, whether he was sober or drunk. His humour, nearly all of his humour was visual. It was always playing to the crowd. And this was because he loved being on stage, and you might not have noticed this. He loved being on stage, and an audience brought out the best in him. And he was really good at it. He knew exactly what the level was and how to do it. Now, much of his visual stuff was captured on his mobile phone in the form of selfies. And when we decided to put this, this slideshow up, we were actually struggling to get enough photos for it. And then Sean, who's here somewhere, there he is, he's over there. Then Sean came up with some goodies because Barry got a new mobile phone and Sean had kindly agreed to take all the photos of the old phone and put it on the new one. So, of the photos, I think there were, I counted 38 that didn't actually have Barry in the picture. But that didn't matter because the other 2,562 did.
We're not accounted for the other 2,000 that I still have.
Yes, Sean says he's still got quite a few more that he didn't send us because he knew that he just would have blown the drive up. In his final years, he lived in a single room above the old Wimble pub in Wallington, and I went round there many times when he was feeling not so good. And the room was filled with Bohemian Rhapsody. There was beads, miniature statues, bracelets, you name it, was there. And in addition, there was 20 hats, which you can see most of them here, 15 coats, God knows how many shirts of the Barry Williams fashion, and six or seven guitars. And of course, the overriding smell, the minute you walked in, was of patchouli. Just wafted everywhere, and I don't know how he did it, quite honestly. Anyway, and he was always dressed stylishly, and he could often be seen preening himself in his pocket mirror. In terms of or any other mirror for that matter. In terms of travel, Barry travelled as light as possible. About 5 years back, the Spoons played a gig in the Isle of Wight, which I wasn't there, but I've heard this story from various members of the band. And this was a camping loo. I think it was a Volkswagen, some Volkswagen owners club. Yeah, I think that's what it was. So he went to that, but he hadn't got a tent. Now he didn't want to waste too much of his valuable money on something that he was unlikely to use again. So he went and bought a tent from Pets at Home. Now, when he finally put it up and settled down inside, it was so small he couldn't stretch his legs out properly. And then we went. We were lucky enough to play at a wedding in Italy with Piero and Paolo. They might still be here. They were here earlier on, certainly. And we were lucky they invited us to play at the wedding, which was a great experience. And Barry hadn't travelled abroad since the days when there were, when there were no proper security checks. He hadn't travelled since then. So anyway, as we approached all the security nonsense, we gave him loads of warnings what he could and he couldn't do, and so on and such like. But when he got to the point, he still managed to have 3 or 4 bottles of various bohemian substances confiscated. Obviously, the patchouli bottle, beard wax, and stuff like that. And this was all confiscated out of his carry-on luggage. Then he went through the scanner, and once again we had warned him, but the alarm went off. Right? And after a thorough search, it was found that it wasn't caused by the clothes pegs that we pegged onto the back of his jacket, unbeknownst to him. It was his vanity mirror in the inside. Now, in his last months, he was put in hospital, and you've got to remember here when he started becoming ill during COVID, but it actually got. He actually got worse during COVID, and particularly afterwards. So in his last months, he was in and out of hospital, which was probably mostly towards the end of all the COVID restrictions and such have you. He was in and out so much we almost actually had a repeat prescription for ambulances, to be honest with you. But once he was in, and he'd been stabilised, you know, from his breathing had been stabilised, his personality switched on. He got nurses there, he got doctors, he got other patients, and he was back on stage. And I think if somebody had been standing who didn't know what was wrong with him, they actually wouldn't think anything was wrong with him. He was, he really cheered up. And he'd also got, if you'll excuse the expression, he also had a very good gallows humour. The first time he was in, I went to visit him he was in a little single room. It was better than some of the private rooms I've heard about. And he was in this little room, and he was bigger than where he lived above the windmill. And he looked like the inside of, you know, those green telephone boxes when they open them up, and you wonder how the engineer works out where all the wires goes. Well, that's what he looked at, wires coming out everywhere. He'd already cottoned on to this, and he wanted a photo shoot of him in the throes of death. Which we haven't actually included it on that, but it is actually very, very funny. He was very up for all that sort of thing. It was amusing, he was always laughing, he was always happy, even in the sort of worst of circumstances. And then there was another occasion, he was lying in a bed, this time it was on a ward, and there was a chap opposite, had a visitor, which I guess was probably his daughter. She was a woman of about 23 years old, very good looking lady. And she'd just come direct from the gym. And with her back to Barry, she bent down to get some stuff out of her bag. So Barry shouts out, "Oi, there's some of us in here with heart conditions. give a thought for the elderly." And this was followed by his stock in trade manic laugh, and I think, you know, we all know and love. Then there was he also had this. Sometimes he got a little bit. Perhaps it was anxiety or something. He just gave a hint that he might be a little bit upset about something, but he quickly dropped back into his humorous mode. And there was this other occasion, I was sitting by his bedside, and a nurse came in, and she said that later on she would need to look at his bum. Now Barry, as far as he was concerned, there was nothing wrong with his bum. It was, you know, it was all his chest and his breathing and all that sort of thing. So he said to her, "What are you going to do? Put a bleeding daffodil in it?" So anyway, the nurse walked away and looked a little bit put out, and Barry actually wondered if he'd inadvertently upset her, which I don't think he did, but he was a little bit worried. And I came back the next day, and he referred back to the daffodil incident, and he said that he was a little bit worried that he'd upset the nurse. So he'd gone into the loo and taken a selfie of his arse. Now I know everybody here has taken a photo of their arse, so you know how difficult it is, because you can't actually see. You can't actually see when you're taking a picture of it. You know, the whole thing's a bit trial and error. But what we do in those situations is we find a good one and then discard the rest. Barry, however, retained all 12 attempts at this. and he treated me to a wonderful display of his wedding tackle in various states of danger. Sometimes with a mirror to sort of like enter the spectacle. Now he claimed that he'd actually showed this to the nurse, but whether he did, I really don't know. Yeah, so but that's what he was like. He was always trying to be humorous. And a little story just to finish off. And this one, sadly, Barry wasn't around to hear it. But I know he would have roared with laughter. You know, he'd been an alcoholic for a lot of his life. And this happened in the last hours of his life. And everybody knew what was about to happen. There was nothing else that anybody could do. And one of the nurses asked, do you know if Barry has an organ donor card or if he's expressed a wish to donate his organs? And the reply to that question was no. And the nurse said, well, I know it's a difficult time, but we need to know very quickly because his liver is in very good condition.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, so ladies and gentlemen, that's a little tribute to Barry, and thanks very much.
Amazing.
This is an open house, so you can come up and, pay your own tribute if you so wish.